We welcome you to our office hours for the course of Fashion as Design here at the Museum of Modern Art. Office hours is meant to be really informal. It's a way for us all to come back together and, Newfoundland, Spain, everybody's coming in. That's quite fantastic. And have this kind of really super informal gathering, an hour-long conversation to extend the discussions in the course, which we really thank you for taking. So today we will focus on the life cycle of garments and also on on sustainability and how to consider issues like fast fashion and how to move forward in the post-pandemic world and in the environmental crisis world when it comes to our fashion studies. I am Paola Antonelli. I'm Senior Curator of the Department of Architecture and Design here at MoMA, and I'm joined today by my MoMA colleague, Anna Burckhardt. Anna, say hello. Yes, hello. Perfect, Anna Burckhardt. And also I'm joined by our very special guest, Shaway Yeh, who is a fantastic friend and a true expert of sustainability in fashion. And she's tuning in all the way from Shanghai in China. And before we go any further, Shaway, would you mind introducing yourselves for our public?
Hi, everybody. Well, this is really the most global moment I feel recently, looking at all these people from everywhere. And thank you so much, Paola and Anna, inviting me to be joining your office hours. So my name is Shaway Yeh, and I'm living in Shanghai. I'm the founder of Yeh Yeh, which is a consultancy agency trying to bring sustainability, technology, and creative together, which I founded about 3 years ago. And before that, I have been chief editors and editorial director for Modern Weekly in China for more than 12 years. And it's one of the most influential lifestyle publications in China. But well, I think maybe we can talk about this later on. So during the process working in the fashion industry for such a long time, and 5 years ago, I was invited to Copenhagen Fashion Summit that kind of really opened my mind to understand the huge environmental and social impact fashion industry has. So therefore, I decided to change my focus to really pushing and promoting and practicing and also keep thinking and maybe contributing a little bit to the whole courses of sustainability. Therefore, I found my super tiny little agency, yeah, but trying to do something interesting and meaningful, and including this.
Which is definitely meaningful, especially for us. I've learned so much from Shaway, and I think you will too. And you'll have a really great chance to have a conversation with her today. But before we go any forward, Anna, do you want to have do you want to give some details, some housekeeping reminders?
Yes, so before we start, a bit of housekeeping. Well, first of all, thank you to everyone that has shared their questions, either through the discussion forums or through email. As we go along, we'll try to answer as many as we can during the session. Please also, if you want, post your questions for us in the Q&A. And you can also upload questions that you're especially eager to hear answers to. You can access the captions by navigating to the bottom right of the Zoom window on desktop and clicking on either closed captions and then view subtitles, or clicking the 3 dots for more and then view subtitles. Several of our MoMA colleagues are present behind the scenes, and they may also respond to the chat if you have any questions, if you need help. You should also feel free to use the chat and speak with all the other attendees. Comment, it doesn't have to be just questions. Just make sure to select all panelists and attendees as recipients so everyone can see your comments. And also a final reminder that we are recording this session and we will share it in the course in the coming days.
Thank you, Anna. So a little bit of introduction before we get into the very heart of the conversation. So over the past months, Anna and I have been working on installing an exhibition here at MoMA called Broken Nature. You know us from the Items show from a few years ago that Anna also worked on, but today we're merging these two exhibitions and these two topics. Items was about the importance of fashion in culture. Broken Nature is about the idea of restorative design, about how we can all be responsible in our everyday life, whether we are citizens or whether we are designers and manufacturers, and have a better, more constructive attitude towards the environment and towards other species. Broken Nature happened first in Milan at the Triennale di Milano about a year ago. It feels so far away, but it was before the pandemic. And a version of the exhibition is here. The original show, I want to mention them because they are also instructors that you know, was with Ala Tamir, Laura Mairan, and Erica Petrillo. And it explored this idea of really reconnect with nature. And since we're part of nature, also reconnect with ourselves. Shaway was a great part of the exhibition. She was part of the advisory council. She was one of the essay writers in the catalog, as you know, because we shared the catalog with you. And as a fashion editor and consultant on sustainability, she was just fundamental in keeping us straight and making us understand how to move forward. So today we will talk about her essay for the Broken Nature catalog, which was titled Martin Margiella's Long Lost Legacy: The Circular Economy Pioneer. And also we'll talk about her work with emerging designers and much more. But Shaway, can you please start? Just in case somebody didn't get to reading the essay, they can do it afterwards. Could you please talk about the essay about Margiela and how you saw him as a pioneer of the circular economy?
Okay, sure. Because well, when Paola asked me to write the contributing essay to this topic, I was so honored, but also so nervous because first of all, I always admired the exhibition she put on. It's always a true inspiration for me. But second of all, the topic about circular design, circular fashion is so huge, or sustainability in fashion, like where should be the angle? I mean, people has been practicing for a long time and there's all different kind of expert, you have Ellen Master Foundation where you can find all kind of knowledge and resources. But then I just realized, and that's also kind of why I try to use my angle to go into the world of sustainability, because none of them are really coming from kind of quote unquote mainstream aesthetic point of view to interpret sustainability or circular design, because most of the things you talk about is like take back, recycling, and how to, all this kind of very technical stuff where people are using desk dark and this and that, or like recycle cottons, recycle polyester. But what about something more creative, something more critical thinking, something more provoking? Then I think around the time, I think that was 2 years ago, right? Because I was in Paris for Fashion Week. Well, remember the time where we can still travel for Fashion Weeks? And I think that was the year or the year before, there was 2 huge retrospective about Martin Margiela. And then, of course, like everybody loved fashion, know about his importance in fashion, and so many people copy his look, the construction, the exaggerated silhouette, the kind of incognito way of presentation. But very few people, I think almost none, approaching him from a kind of sustainability or circular point of view. And that reminds me, actually, he could be the first one who is without people know the word about what before not knowing, before people who are familiar with the word of sustainability or circular fashion, he's already doing that. And which make, so that's why I think maybe I should just write about Martin Margiela. But of course, thinking back right now, and like it's a little bit outdated. And then why do I say, I mean, Margiela is still Margiela. A lot of his practice is still kind of like, really leading an avant-garde, but not because this is, I will talk about it later, because I think for what's happening in the past 2 years, there's so many young designers and they are all leading their own unique practice, and which is like, I don't know who will become the future Margiela, but definitely the practice is so much more diverse than Margiela. But going back to why do I think Margiela is the pioneer of circular fashion, because I think most people remember like when he started from the 1990s, and then I think there's a few things which are very revolutionary. Is I think he is the first designer who is proposing something which is totally against what fashion system believe, which is the constantly new. Because in fashion, you need to keep proposing new collection after one new collection. You need to use new material to do a new design. And I think Margiela, back in the early 90s, he already said, why do I need to producing anything new? Why can I use some old material, something I pick from the vintage, the rack, the secondhand, the whatever discarded things, and make it something new. And then, but I think that's approach a lot of young designer will use, like what we call upcycling right now, because the the very limited resources they have to virgin material, to nice material. So they oftentimes they go to search in vintage market. But what is even more progressive about Magella's approach is he started, I think in 1994, he started his series called Replica, which he reissued something old, the old design, the old model, things in the stock, and he called it new. So because he kind of suggesting like there's enough out there in terms of design, in terms of fashion, in terms of style, in terms of material. So why do we still producing even more? And also Honeko is a pioneer because I think a lot of his thinking and what is so great is reflecting on fashion system. And why does he need to reflecting about system? Because he's sensing like there's the fast fashion is happening during around that time. Because as people who are familiar with sustainability in fashion will know, like if there's no fast fashion, actually the problem probably is not that huge, because we all know every single human activity will have carbon footprint, will have impact, but not to such a disastrous amount if without the advent of a fast fashion. So same thing, I think Magella also sensitively feel that, but he didn't articulate in a circular economy or sustainable way. He responded with his own aesthetic practice, which is really thinking about, do we need to produce this much? Can we just do the same thing over and over again and call it new? And then can we keep the memory of an items, and can we use some dead stock, but which is not dead, it's dying, because dying is also a process, and then et cetera, et cetera. So that's why—
That's really interesting. Yeah, no, sorry if I interrupted you. It's really interesting because what you mentioned in the essay is the idea of circularity, which is about disjointing, just separating the idea of economic growth from the production of new, more resources. That's really fascinating. And that's why Margiela stands as such an example. So if you were, it's kind of tough, but if you were to give a definition of circular fashion, what would it be?
Well, I think LMR as a foundation already giving a definition about circular design. So I think there's three key examples, which I can read it later. But from my understanding, it's very simple, because we're using to design or using things in a kind of so-called linear way. So we take the resources and we make it into something, we use it, and then we dump it. So, but the problem is the resources become more and more scarce. And then when we dump it, there's more and more waste. There's no place to put it. So it becomes like on the two ends, it's become a problem. So that's what people thinking, why do we join these two ends together? So if every resources we take, we use, and it will go back to become the feedstock of this new circle, then there should be have no problem. So I think the definition LMR as a foundation give is,
well, we just posted it, but yeah, no, go ahead and mention it. It's good to talk about it. Yeah,
like designing our waste and pollution, that's number one. So that means when you're designing, you should think about like don't try not to waste as much materials, trying to use recycle, regenerate materials, and of course, like you should be safe and secure, like there's no pollutions or whatever. And number two principle is keeping products and material in use. That means trying to make something which lasts longer, is durable, has more value, so people don't easily just discard it. And number three is regenerating natural system, which is actually my new interest in, and which is, I think, a younger generation of designer, their practice, which is kind of really opened my mind, is going back, well, not only younger, a big group like Karens or whatever. People are all talking about regenerative agriculture and trying to boost the biodiversity, which is kind of way it's linking back to regenerative natural systems, which is something I think Martin Margella's practice doesn't really touch on, even though his practice might have. I think his old revolutionary thinking is still within the fashion system itself. It's not going out the fashion system itself. So I'm hoping the younger generation of Margiela will going out the fashion system itself, or go into the other systems.
It's fascinating because I think it has to do with the turn of the millennium, or just the fact, some people say that this is the century of wet system, the century of biology, right? I feel that this addition of biology and biodiversity to fashion is really revolutionary. And so since this is your interest right now, is that the kind of work that you're doing with your consultancy, with Yeh Yeh Yeh? Are you really, what do you do? What does a consultancy on sustainability and circularity in fashion do?
Okay, well, this probably not my consultancy. This is like my research part, because I would just kind of be late into discovering more about this practice like early on this year, and actually inspired by young designers. And then I start doing more research on that. But my consultancy, which is basically quite simple because since I'm based in China, and then there's kind of two arms of my consultancy. One is working with corporation and companies, and then either is with international company like Kering or Nike and those companies, which they have their own quite sophisticated and complete and then sustainability strategies, but they were just never been communicated in China before, and not to even mention to be implemented. But I think because the whole awareness is rising, so they start like I think started with Kering, and now more and more companies are trying to follow suit. They started to want to communicate their sustainable strategy to the consumers or users or audiences in China. And even last year, they launched this program called K Generation Award, which is actually very interesting. They're looking for Chinese startup can help to solve the sustainability or environmental problems within the fashion industry. So it's supposed to be continued this year, but we all know everything was kind of put on pause this year. But I think it's the first time that international corporation was especially design some programs in China and addressing the issue, not money making, but trying to solve like environmental and social problems. But another one, another part of my consultancy, which I find is most interesting, is actually working and helping Chinese companies to become more sustainable. And because I think within my tenure being the fashion editor in the past more than 10 years, is also the time Chinese fashion industry coming rising to its own. So a lot of companies, they started transform from just simply manufacture, become a brand. So while the process they're trying to seeking for branding or thinking about what is my brand, and you know, brand stands for values. What kind of value do you believe? What kind of value do you want to communicate to your consumers? And a lot of them, they didn't really know. So there's a long soul searching. And most people unfortunately believe if I just hire famous foreign designers and supermodels, that's my branding. So I said, well, this is actually a very good opportunity to introduce the idea of sustainability to them, because why not to use this, doing something good for the society and the environment and your people, as your branding. Like, so I think some company really took it. So I was just helping to understand, first of all, what is sustainability, what the company can do. And then to, you know, when the Chinese company decide to do something, the speed is very fast. So they put into the force to start developing some project. And then like I've been working with this Chinese company called Erdos for 3 years. So starting from understanding, making the strategies and then making a plan to have a new product, the whole new product line of regenerate cashmere was launched last year, just only within 2 years. And now they're expanding. So I think that's kind of really kind of fulfilling. And the other part is still part of communication. So trying to introduce more idea about sustainability and to broaden the spectrum of the narrative of sustainability. So to make it doesn't sound boring and dry. And then also to engage more young creative people and designers into this course. So that's basically what I do.
Great. So I wanted to jump in because we've been getting some really great questions. And Shaway, thank you for sharing that really great definition that I think really helped everybody to sort of like understand a little bit more what we were talking about. In relation to that, Ellen asks, I would love to hear your thoughts about the role of secondhand vintage clothing in circular fashion. What are the possibilities and what are the perils?
Well, it is a great question because, okay, so when I said earlier, most people talk about circular fashion, then of course the main focus, they're thinking about recycling or using regenerative material, organic and all this or all that. But for me, for a while before I really truly understand what the circular economy is, I think this is another kind of I wouldn't call it greenwashing. I don't know, circular washing, because I mean, you're still taking so much, produce so much, and not to mention a lot of technology and the infrastructure is still not there to take back all the clothes to make into the new one. But actually, and then it doesn't. So I think why all the companies and whatever embracing this, because they don't want to touch a fundamental issue, which is the business model, because you're still producing a lot of things which people don't need. And then, so it doesn't really help. We just turn the waste into the virgin material and then go into the loop again. But I think more and more when I understand circular economy, actually there's also circular circular business model. So i.e. is this kind of like a secondhand, vintage, swapping, rental, all this kind of thing. So that means the company can still make money, or the enterprise can still generate values, but without producing more. And then, so by putting the existing product circulating in the market. So I do think this is quite meaningful. I don't know how big the scale can go to, because I think with the younger people, and also I think with certain kind of social issues and economy issues, it will become very popular again. So this kind of like, for me, I think this is like the other half of real answers to circular economy.
Mm-hmm. And actually, I'm seeing here a question that speaks directly to what you just said, and it's really smart. Needy wants to know, what do you think about the sudden emergence of Instagram vintage thrift shops? She says, on one hand, one does want to support such endeavors, especially when they have beautiful pieces, but with no traceability or certificates on their actual ethos on sustainability, it becomes a tough decision. How do you think these shops can be better at sustainability?
Well, I don't quite exactly know what you mentioned about the Instagram, because I don't use Instagram. Well, no, I don't really, because it's not very easy to access in China. Mm-hmm. But I think there might be, I mean, I know there's like there's a lot of people using, I mean, again, like, I think a good economy model is not only general value, it should be also be using kind of like building communities. So I think a lot of like circular economy or sustainable fashion, especially among young people, that's all this swapping and secondhand, whatever, is trying to using this to find people who are like-minded. They like the similar style. So the value is not only the exchange of the clothes, it's also the exchange of relationships. And then people who either own this or who organize this network or whatever can find other things more than just simply exchange clothes. But so I think in that part is kind of good. But I don't know if she's mentioned about like the valuable secondhand, like a vintage luxury, where is like a lot of companies which just trying to do this, like people like Gucci and Burberry, whatever, they work with real, and then they're trying to make the whole circulation of their secondhand part of their business model. And for that, I think that's where like some people are saying they start employing the technology of blockchain, but I think it's a little bit, I don't know what's the perfect English for that. It's like you're using a very great technology into something which is kind of small. So what they say by embedding
it's never too small. It's never too small. I mean, I hope that the blockchain technology will become really pervasive, because it can be so helpful. I'm glad that you brought it up. It's great.
Well, I think a lot of people say they're using that to, I mean, I think there's basically two use, right? One is traceability. So people can know the clothes, what does the clothes was made, and then who made it, and then to embed a story into a clothes, which I think is great. And the more story you embed into a clothes, the clothes can have a different kind of value. So it's not just monetary and material value. But that also has to do because I saw a few people practicing it, and I'm trying to help some brand practice it. But the fundamental problem is like you need to have really enough interesting story to tell. You cannot sell this garment is made at so-and-so factory by number 0XYZ, and then it be shipped to some warehouses, whatever, and now it's your hand. I mean, well, this is kind of the life cycle of the garment, but it doesn't necessarily make it a meaningful life story of the garment. So I think that's one thing. So how can we imbue and then infuse more story into really a garment, or does a garment really have so much more stories? That's one thing. But the other one, yeah, I think like blockchain is for like secondhand market and secondhand trending, especially in terms of luxury market or collector's items. I think it could be quite useful, which is true, yeah. But.
And I think there's something really interesting, kind of goes back to what you were saying about systems, right? So in terms of in terms of an Instagram shop that sort of like deals with vintage or secondhand, that goes more to sort of like the individual choices that we make every day and sort of like at a smaller scale. But really the issue here is that companies and anybody that's sort of like dealing in fashion needs to be thinking system wise. Eileen wanted to know, sort of going back to this idea of scale, she wanted to know, how can we as individuals practice sustainability? What is the best material for garment purchases that is sustainable or as sustainable as it can be? How does the fashion industry see itself becoming sustainable if it means consumers hang on to their clothes for longer and shop in their wardrobe? Given that if you keep something long enough, it will eventually come back to fashion. What do you think?
Well, I think there's many different approach. One, first of all, first is from the material choice, right? And I think more and more brands, not only just a special designer, even like a big company like, quote unquote fast fashion company like H&M, I mean, they're really quite focused on their conscious collections, and they're just also doing the, I think there's a big news recently that they're doing truly recycled collection. They're using this called green machine, which they can take back the garment and put into the machine and grind it and thread it into a new garments again. So I think that's kind of revolutionary. But I think a lot of brands right now, they provide information about where the materials are from. So of course, I wouldn't say the natural material is definitely better than the synthetic one, although synthetic does have some its own problem, which is because it's oil based, and then you have this microplastic problem, etc., etc. But while in terms of recycling, it might be much easier to be recycled because given the current technology, and the natural fiber like cottons and wool, all the things that people thinking natural is better, but actually it's not, because during it's the raw material stage, because the land use, because the agriculture, because the husbandry it actually has a much bigger carbon footprint than certain kind of synthetic. So it's very hard to say which one, but of course, basically choose something organic or recycles, or with some kind of better cotton, or better something like a certain kind of credits, which is only better. And then so that's from the material choice. And then at best for the customer, what they can do is try to think before you buy. When you buy something, try to wear it at least more than, I don't know, 10 times, trying to keep it as long as possible, and don't wash it too often. And then when you don't need it, so really just, give it as much value as each garment as possible. And even when you don't need it, you can either donate it or recycle it, or trying to change it to something else. Don't just throw it away easily. So I think that's all like in different stage of when you are buying and choosing a garment, like things you can do to become more sustainable.
By the way, do you still have your pandemic coat?
Because
I remember at some point, Shaway was stranded in New York. She couldn't go back to Shanghai. I think it was February, right? Or was it March?
You couldn't, February.
Yeah, you couldn't go back. You were stranded in New York with this gorgeous coat that we call the pandemic coat.
Well, actually, Paola, thank you for introducing it.
Please.
Because we've been getting so many questions about it. I was kind of waiting to see how we could introduce them, and you gave me the perfect segue. So, if I may, Ishara wants to know, what will happen to fashion with the pandemic? What are the safe ways for transportation or products around the world? How can a girl like me from a South Asian country, well, this is a separate one that we will address later, because everybody also wants to have tips about how to join or sort of like start their career in the fashion industry. But let's start with talking about COVID, and then we will jump into the rest.
Well, it's such a huge question. I don't think I can really answer it. I mean, I can say something, and also it's not only just for fashion industry, right? It's really affecting all different kind of industry. I think the biggest hit of pandemic to fashion industry is like the disruption and the damage it does to the supply chains, because a lot of factories are closed, and then a lot of, because people cannot go out, they cannot shop, they cannot resume the normal commercial activities. So a lot of order was canceled. That means a lot of people cannot get their money back, and then the workers doesn't have jobs, and who is going to be responsible for this? So I think that's actually the hugest problem the pandemic did to fashion industries, and that's still kind of remain to see how can we fix this. It all depends how quick the economy can be recovered. But of course, we also hope when the economy is recovered, it don't go back to the status quo, the way the business as usual. They have much newer way about doing it, and then which is mainly because we can look at, I mean, of course, China is a unique case where because it's way of a social management. So the pandemics was totally under control, and then the economy activity was recovering very fast, and then some of those other countries, because you can realize, okay, what I'm trying to say is a lot of activity was being transformed into online, I mean digital. So the digital production has kind of complementing the loads of like physical production. And it has this good part, which is means if you use more digital technology, use the algorithm and big data, you can know more precisely what your customer want and the orders they were made. So you don't make like, you don't overproduce. You don't produce a lot of stuff which is no one want and become a waste. So the more accurate the digital prediction can be, and then the more agile the whole supply chain can be, and which including the better prediction or better allocation, so you can produce more locally and transport much shorter, so you don't need to worry about long distance transportation, and not to mention save a lot of carbon footprints, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the fashion system, production system is kind of undergoing this kind of transformation because of pandemic, but it's also a good way to transform itself to a much more digital oriented, but maybe much more precise way of produce like a supply and demand.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I feel like, I mean, that's some of the other questions that we've received are about sort of like, how does the fashion system need to change? And I think the pandemic might have sort of like given us the sort of like situation to force us to change. Jonathan, for example, Julian asked, do you feel like the volume and format of fashion weeks needs to be reimagined due to its highly unsustainable effects on the environment and local economies? If so, what possibilities do you see for this to change? I personally kind of feel like the pandemic has sort of like given us a little bit of an insight into that, but I'm curious to know your thoughts.
Well, yes, I mean, definitely, because I think even before the pandemic, people are already talking about there's too much fashion week, there's too many collections, like designers are dying and blah, 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 all this, but no one wants to be the first one to make the change. So it's still kind of continuing this until the pandemic put everything on hold. Then of course it make a lot of damage to business, whatever, in the short term, but in the long term, people realize, well, first of all, like you can still communicate to your consumers and audience without putting a lavish fashion week. And then of course, we as a fashion editor still love to see and touch clothes, but there's so many other creative way to get to know the clothes better. And then maybe there's so many ways not there, but I think people, like smart people, if they want to do business, they're trying to invent it. And then, so that means there's not only, because I think people tend to be lazy. When a lavish fashion week can do the things, why do they need to think about something else, right? So like we invite people come here, we put on big shows and everybody is happy. But now you cannot do that. So people will start doing, first of all, people are producing all different kinds of films, and then some are more interesting than the others. I think like everybody was talking about recently, Gucci just released the Gucci Fest, a kind of 7-day show film shot by Gus Van Sant to replace us like a traditional fashion show to introduce this new collection. And well, I wouldn't say it's good or bad, but at least it's something totally new, and it could be open a lot of new way about rethinking how to present your collection in a much more interesting way, and also how to collaborate with more people who are outside your own industry, and how to distribute your contents. So all these kind of things can all happen. So of course, like people still need fashion week because people still need to gather together. They still want to see people in their own industry, but maybe not in such high intensity frequencies or volumes or whatever. So I think even after the pandemic, I mean, they're still going to have fashion shows and fashion weeks, but probably in a much more different way of conducting. And then also, and also for the brands that if they realize they can reach their audience and they can do their business without putting all the things, I mean, why do they need to go back to the old way? So.
And speaking about sort of like the role of the designer and this idea that like, yeah, a change in the system sort of like also demands a reimagining of the sort of the role of the designer in a way. I think you just said also that needs to be a little bit more multidisciplinary. Like it needs to be sort of like thought. Yeah. Designers need to be thinking about other industries. There's an interesting question about, now I lost it in my, from Myra. She says, sustainability is so anti-disciplinary. How? Where do you see those who aren't from a traditional fashion design background playing a role?
Well, I think everybody is from certain kind of background, but we are all learning, right? Learning to learn something else, or learning to understand the whole system, and learning to do, yeah, whatever. I'm sure there's a benefit in the traditional fashion background, and also maybe fashion system, fashion education need to change too. But then again, as I was, when I saw the question, I was joking like, I'll stop being a designer, go to be a farmer. I want to be a farmer, or going to be a biologist, or going to be a data scientist, right? Because I think in order to be a good designer nowadays, you probably need to learn all these skills. So yeah, don't just be a designer.
I love that. Paola, do you have any questions from like that one that I haven't touched on that you feel like are necessary? There are so many, it's taking me forever.
Yeah, no, exactly. There are so many. I kind of liked very much Myra's. I was kind of itching to also answer. I was like, that is design, that is design too. So I absolutely subscribe to what Shaway said. Well, what I wanted to ask Shaway, she talked about doing research. So her past role as a fashion editor informed her desire and her current role as a researcher. And Shaway, you just did your first forum, which was the Shan Future 2020 forum. And I was wondering, how did you organize it and what did you learn from it? So how did it all happen? I'm going to post the link for everyone so you'll be able to actually watch. You recorded the sessions right there, so
yeah, it's all show videos. Although all the text is in Chinese, and then I didn't.
Oh, there's a lot of people, but there's a lot of people that are
it's all
Chinese.
videos, so bilinguals, and so which is fine. Well, actually, it's my third forums already. I started doing it 3 years ago, and then during Shanghai Fashion Week. So basically, just talk about sustainability. And first year was kind of small because I'm not quite sure how many people are interested in this topic. Even I mean, not only just China, even in terms of the world 3 years ago, it's still not such a popular topic. And the reception was quite good. And last year I just did quite the big ones, like a traditional conference in the big hotel ballrooms, has like 400 people and more people online. And so, and I invite about 30 speakers internationally. And then, so there's focus on Asia innovation. There's also always like international, like people from Copenhagen Fashion Summit and British Fashion Council, and we Shanghai Fashion Week, and then have a different kind of conversation. But this year, of course, it's because of pandemic. And then of course in China is okay because the Shanghai Fashion Week is still going on. Everyone is still doing offline thing. But then I think it's not about physically I can do an event, because if I do an event, I wouldn't be able to invite any international guests. Then it will be quite boring, the whole narratives. So in this case, I should try to do something online and totally digital. But then again, I think as most people like me, after a while, we all kind of zoom out. We don't want to do more and more Zoom talks, especially if I was planning 2 or 3 days forums. I mean, it can be done, but you need to excellent speakers all the time. So I think why not try to do something more interesting and fun, which is doing it could be like a studio visit or a vlog or just like a conversation, of course, intercept with some serious conversations too. So that's why I make my forum this time totally online, and there's 3 days, and then each day has about 2 hours programs. And then I roughly make it a thing like transformation, regeneration, and challenge. I think transformation is because I was really also obsessed with all this biomaterial, biologists, like bio challenges for the people who kind of making magic, like change some material into the others. That I think like so I call it transformation. But the other thing is also in terms of circular design, a lot of people say what circular design does to designer is designer need to stop being a designer. They need to be a transformer, because before designer is more like artist. Like a traditional thing is that, okay, I have a mood board, I'm thinking out of a blank, and then this is my idea, I'm going to realize my idea. But a circular designer or circular economy is like, I have these materials here, I have the garment here, I have something already exist. How can I transform it into another thing, a new thing, to giving a second life, to give it a new meaning? So that's why I think that's why I call it transformation the first day. And the second day is about regeneration, which is of course going back to my new interest in regenerate agriculture and biodiversity. So by posting that, I can also do some research, I can feature, interview some designer, which inspires me. And the third day was just more generic challenge, right? Who is not facing challenge this year? So let's just put it open as challenge. So that's basically the 3 days of my online forums are this year.
That's good. And talking about the designers that inspire you, do you have any designer that you would like to highlight besides Margiela that really is doing it, or at least is trying in the right way?
Yeah, well, I think actually I was quite inspired by this experience because I was one of the jury of the MoMA Prize this year. So by being a jury, and then I got to meet was 10 fantastic finalists. But what I was actually was more impressed is about the whole approach about I mean, it's the one of the most historical, like a fashion design prize, right? There's only one where Karl Lagerfeld, Valentino's, Armani all won the award until nowadays. And then so I think I realized the approach of doing like a fashion prize is different than some big corporations one, maybe because they're a material company. So they are more like into scientific fact and training process. So of course, one of the key principle is sustainability. So each designer need to submit a report. They're being trained. What is sustainability? What is traceability? What do they have to do? So each of them need to submit a report. So of course, some is kind of whatever, but there was 2 designers, their report really inspired me, that I think they know so much more than I do. So one is Richard Malone. So this British designers, and he is the one, he was talking about his whole process, which is really going back to regenerate agriculture. And he was working.
Slide 4 so that people can see the image. Sorry, Shaway, just to make sure that people can see the image. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, well, so of course he won the award, and then I mean his clothes is quite beautiful and different, but in a very, it's kind of in a larger way, it's very limited quantity. But what is impressed me is that so he worked with farmers in mainly in this farm in India called Oshanti. So and then the practice regenerate agriculture. So he sources material from them. And also, I think from some the wool farms in Australia, and he's from Scotland. So, and I think he also helped to establish fiber shed in England. So he is really practicing. He's sourcing his material and from the farms and he worked with the communities, and all the dyers and weavers and whatever he knows about them. And then of course since he worked with fiber shares, so Moses, I think I don't know it's 100% of Moses clothes after you don't need them, but actually they're so beautiful and expensive, so you won't discard it like easily. But if you happen to be need to discard it, I think you can just put it back into the soil. It will like a biodegraded and then enrich the soil again. So including so complete the whole loops. So I didn't know like designer will work with farmers, and then not only farmers and people who make plant dyes and different kind of dyes, and then like the old weavers, and then women working in the studios, and the whole loops. So that's kind of that's kind of like really inspires me. Then of course, another designer from the MoMA press is Bode, and her approach is also very inspiring. It's like, I think she collect and use a lot of old textile, but she's not only simply uses, she documented, and then she tried to make a library out of it. And also she studied a way a lot of old textile was made and trying to represent or recreate that kind of technology. So it's kind of recreate memory through the way of dealing with textile and fabric. So I think this is all the new generation of designers who are truly inspiring.
That is great. Thank you so much. Yeah, we're very, as I mentioned to you, we're very, very proud of Richard Malone because he was part of the exhibition of items. And actually, Kelly just posted all these different links to interviews and commentary that he made. So the role of materials, you talked about, then I'm going to give the word again to Anna for questions from the audience, but you spoke about your interest in biodesign. And biodesign is something that's been discussed for quite a while. And I remember about 7 years ago, there were the experiments, silk that was made from spider DNA or leather that was grown in vitro. So it went from an idea to companies, in the span of about 5 years. And there's this yearly conference called Biofabricate that really speaks about it. And now there's the natural selection of the species. So all these different companies that came up with these new materials that supposedly were copacetic with nature, but needed a lot of energy and investment, where are they now? Question mark.
I think most of them are still, well, it depends. Each company, I mean, I don't know all of them that well, but I know like Milo, a lot of companies are using Milo, and actually a lot of company is investing in Milo. I just read this article, I forgot, like a few of the big groups there. So I think Milo probably is more, among all those companies, is more widely used. Well, I wouldn't say wide because it's still expensive or whatever, but I know. And I think people using Arginet and Bowstrait, so it's Milo and what is the other? So I think these are the being used. I mean, of course, most of them are still at the very early stage. And then people are trying to experiment, but it has things to do with, it's like you need a lot of investment to make all this into reality.
Yeah, exactly. But so you believe in this new set of materials, or do you think that they are a distraction from the concentration that we should have into using what's already there?
Well, I don't think it's a distraction. I don't think they are going to solve the problem, giving maybe one day, but definitely not now. They're not going to solve the real problem. But they are like we say fashion, we don't say garment, right? Garment is the clothes you wear, but fashion is a story, a fantasy, a imagination, or something inspire you. So same thing as this. I mean, this new material, this for me, I always love them. This sounds like magic, like alchemy. And then like the transformation of different, how can you take something which is as humble as agate or shells, whatever, make it into a beautiful fabrics or something useful. Yeah, like, so, I mean, how real it is, I don't know, but I think we'll need this kind of inspiration in order to keep this kind of agenda moving. Because if we only use, I mean, I'm not saying it's not beautiful, but we only use everything which is recycled, the recycled PET bottles or like the old cotton shirts or whatever. I mean, it's nice, but it somehow feels kind of depressing. So it's good to think about like, yeah, people.
And it's monodirectional.
Yeah.
It's monodirectional. And as you say, there are many different ways. And also it's one of the points in Broken Nature that there are many different ways to be restorative, and different directions need to be taken so that creativity, not only creativity is inspired, but also the industry, the chemical companies, just we all have to bring the system with us. So I think this is a very important aspect, not only one strategies, but many. Anna, do you have other questions from the audience?
Yeah, actually, good point, Paola. I wanted to sort of like go back to that, particularly when you were talking about the sort of like regenerative agriculture and the work with the communities. There's a really good question that we have here from Oh my God, I have lost it. There are so many. I think it is from Daniela, and she wants to know what is the relationship between gender and sustainability?
Well, it's great questions. I mean, gender and sustainability. Okay, I mean, I don't have a theory, but I have a lot of observations. First of all, I mean, like there's a lot of linkage between women and climate change, because I think the most climate victims happen to be women, because the most area who suffer most from like climate change, like the area where it's like usually, yeah, woman is the one who's kind of bear the consequences most. So there's a huge linkage between to dealing with climate change and protecting or women's. And then on the other one, I mean, it's funny because like one time I was asking Stella McCartney, and it's like, I say, why are all this? I mean, of course now we are more, but not traditional. Conventionally, we think about like a woman who are for sustainability. It's like Stella McCartney, Vivienne Westwood, Catherine Hammett, and yeah. So I say like, why they are all British women? And then she said, because we are punk. So I think it's a great answer. I don't know the truth, but of course she has another answer because woman giving birth, so she has more stronger lingers nature. So we care about the children, offspring, and next generation so much more. So that's why there's kind of more natural or emotional linkage for women to understand the importance about sustainability. So I think all of the above could be the answers of the relationship between gender and sustainability.
I think that was a really good question. And I mean, I was also thinking about sort of like going back to what Paola was saying, and really what Broken Nature wants to do is to sort of like make the claim that sustainability and sort of like our relationship to the environment goes beyond just what we usually think of the environment. It sort of like applies to intersectional ideas of gender, of race. And I think what you just mentioned is a really good example, the idea of like generative agriculture and how a lot of the farmers and a lot of the textile workers are women. So I think it's really interesting and a really good question from Daniela. I did want to say that we only have 7 minutes left, and we have had a lot of questions about breaking into fashion, and sort of like how to start your own fashion career as an emerging designer. So, you know, Felicia wanted to know, how can I start my own business? Tahira wanted to know how to start a fashion line. Do you have any tips for listeners right now? Like, it's a big question, but you know, we have an expert here, and I feel like it might be good to sort of end with that.
Yeah, it is a very big question. So I think to start your own business, I think maybe now is a good time because the system is kind of disrupted, and I think and also the widely available like the digital platforms. So I think people can easily start us something online as long as you know how to find your audience and grow your own community. And also because I think one thing quite important, sustainability or not, because more and more people are talking direct to consumer, like a D2C business model. And then so of course, yeah, so I think that's the way of, that's kind of new way of doing business. So no, don't go through like especially I think again going back to pandemic also kind of improve, like whatever brand or designer or store can directly talk to your consumers and not go through the retailers or third parties and this and that. It's much more easier to resume their business. So I think, so by the same token, it's, I assume it's the barrier is much lower for anybody who want to start their own business if they can find their audience through the power of the internet and then have direct connection with them and then can directly sell into them. And then, and also again, going back. So this is kind of more like on-demand model is also very sustainable.
And also, speaking of access, and I think this is a question, I think these are questions also for Paola and for you, Shaway, since you're both sort of like constantly thinking about this, but a lot of people want to know, how can we make sustainability more accessible? So for example, Lori has a really good question where she says, is there a role here for fast fashion retail stores in the inner cities? the Black and Latino shoppers whose choices lead many fashion trends have little choice of where to shop in fashion deserts like Newark, New Jersey. Is there any chance of trickle down for sustainable fashion?
Well, I think definitely yes, because we're talking about interesting example, whatever, but all these young designers I admire, but the problem is like the scale is very small. So the impact will never be as big companies. And then the fast fashion, I mean, of course, is a complex issue. I mean, like it's not level because we also have to remember like H&M, they put into a lot of resources trying to study all this kind of renewable technology or whatever, and then trying to put that into practice. Of course, you're always asking them like question them about their business model, but I think they're also trying to do, although I kind of doubt it, like a rental, whatever, different kind of circular model. But as I mentioned earlier, like last week or 2 weeks ago, they just launched this new like a totally recycling system called Green Machine. And actually, because then, but it's being used at Monkey, one of their lower price point lines. Because because I saw the machine before because it's invented by Hong Kong retail. So I saw them. So I think they can literally just putting the whole garment into and thread it and become a new garment out. But you can imagine like the quality of the fabric is not so great. So I think that we keep improving to the point and now they've been commercially produced, of course, not to a huge scale, but then I guess that's why they put into Monkey, which is a lower price point line. But that also means more teenagers and or like people in the inner cities whatever have access to this newly, truly regenerated garment or material. So I think if they can really utilizing their benefit of the scale and then really scaling up all this new technology, I think the impact will be truly great. But of course, on the other hand, they also really need to readjust their business model too.
Fascinating, because this question made me think immediately of the food industry and the food system. I mean, the idea that if you are in certain parts of the world and you have a certain income and you are from a certain background, you only have access to fast, whether it's food or fashion. It's fascinating. And in a way, the food industry has gone through this or tried to go through this for decades, right? So from Alice Waters and Chef Anis and the idea of teaching people from any kind of background how to appreciate good food. So it's so fascinating. I really like this. And I think that Anna and I will carry this idea with us. But I think we're at 9:59, so 9:59 here, and instead it is 11:59 in Shanghai. So we have to 59 p.m. So it's almost midnight, and Shaway is gonna transform herself in a beautiful, even more beautiful princess right now after 1 minute. But I am going to like close the loop here with 3 observations that are related to broken nature and also to items and to Yeh, Yeh, Yeh. First of all, the reminder that we are nature. So whatever we try to do to save the environment, we do to save ourselves. It's as simple as that. The second is the idea of what design is. Design is not embellishment. There are some schools that teach design joined with art, but there are some other schools like the one I went to that teach design together with engineering. So think of that. You can be a designer in many different ways. And the new type of design knowledge that Shaway is preaching, that also encompasses biology, a little bit of generalism, or at least being able to bring in the experts you need, is very contemporary and is taught in many schools. And if not, you should demand it. And the last observation that is very important is that being restorative, regenerative, and responsible does not mean self-flagellating, sacrificing sensuality, elegance, humor, not at all. We can be great designers and very responsible designers and still celebrate everything that we got into design for. So I think that Shaway is an example. Richard Malone, our beloved, is a great example. And I really exhort you all to take this path. I thank you so much for spending this hour with us from all over the world. It's been moving to see you all pop up and ask questions. And Shaway, my friend, thank you so much for this great, great conversation. And thank you also to all of our behind the scenes MoMA colleagues. You've been great. Shaway, good night. Bye, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you so much.
Ciao.